Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everybody. My name is Scott Brooks. I am the host for you today for this coffee chat over the next half hour. And I am one of the founding partners of OrgVitality and have a background and PhD in industrial and organizational psychology. I'm the head of consulting within OrgVitality, a SIOP Fellow, and I've been doing survey work for a long time, ever since surveys were all paper. But that's not what this is about. This is about Chat GPT, and it's about sort of a day in the life, like how does someone like a survey consultant or a survey practitioner, how might somebody use Chat GPT? So it's a little bit of a day in the life, and there are some real examples of how we've been using it in our firm that I'll share. This is not a Chat GPT intro session. You could Google stuff, and if you're good enough to sign into a webinar, you're good enough to get an account and so forth and figure out how that works. So this is just a little bit more, how things happen. I would like to encourage chatting. So please, in the Q&A box throughout the session or the chat box, pop in questions you have, thoughts you might have. I'll also ask for any quick thoughts or introduction or suggestions from the group about what maybe I should stick into a chat. So we're going to be doing this live. First thing, just to get things started, if you are coming from an industry where you want me to use your industry as an example, pop that industry into the chat. Or the Q&A, and I'll respond. I'll pick one, and we can go forward from that. So what you see on the screen is what the Chat GPT portal looks like. And one of the first things you got to do, and one of the first things I always do, is you put in a persona, or what do you want the context to be? And right now, I'm popping in here. You can see you're a behavioral scientist inside a large global organization devoted to running an annual survey. So now I am just like setting the stage that this is what Chat GPT should be responding in terms of, and you can see one of the things it's doing now is I didn't even ask it a question yet, but it's figuring out, right, how should I respond? It's like, okay, these are the kinds of things maybe you do in your job as a behavioral scientist in a large organization. And it's not wrong. You could see annual surveys, 360s, other general listening programs, HR analytics, action planning, and so forth and so on. And by the way, what you just saw happen is a network error that happens on occasion, and you can just sort of hit restart and it'll go again. One thing to note is if you ever do the same chat twice, don't expect it'll always be the same answer. It's a little frustrating sometimes, but that's the way that it sort of works. So anyway, I'm checking to see if anybody's popped in. Yes. Okay. So I've got a next thing. And so I'm going to have my next chat be, give this a chance to finish up for a second. And okay, good stuff. This is all about what your job could be. It talks about your role. ChatGPT, all the way, almost always ends in some sort of finishing paragraph saying "Go team" of some sort. Now I'm going to paste in another thing. By the way, this little square up top, that when I paste it, it also tries to interpret it as a picture. So we'll just ignore that for now. So you're designing a survey for an airline organization. One of the different topics to consider in a survey that might not be as relevant for other industries. So this is one of the things that helps calibrate. One of the things at OrgVitality we're big believers in is not being generic, right? It's hard to be generic and be strategic at the same time because it's hard to copy your way to a competitive differentiation. But if you're to look at some of the topics it's popping in here, safety, security, customer service, and passenger interactions, right? Stress, fatigue management, talks about long hours in aviation, all these kinds of things. This is great. right? There are some things that are fairly generic or common, like work-life balance and so forth, and employee engagement. But this is not a bad kind of start. Now, let's say that I wanted to build off something like this and say, let's pick something from this list, um, like environmental sustainability. That's something that a lot of people have an interest in. So what if um, our strategic focus, you know, is increasingly on, actually, let's say innovation. Would that change the focus? One of the things that I'm illustrating here is that this is not like a Google search or anything like that. It's iterative and it remembers, and it's a continuation of the prior chat. So now, okay, here it says here, if your airline strategic focus is increasing on innovation, and it gives a slightly updated list. So almost never is the first pop out of Chat GPT what I'm looking for. And some sort of refinement is often kind of cool. So this is the kind of thing that is really handy with designing surveys and stuff like that. Now let me get a little bit more specific, and this will be kind of fun. So if I say I need to add 10 items, which is kind of a lot maybe for a regular survey, but let's just go with it. 10 items on a safety climate to an annual opinion survey let me just say, in a global airline organization, just to keep with our example. They give me 10 items on safety climate in a tabular format with item in the first column, rationale in the second, and academic references in the third. And so this is a way of telling ChatGPT, yeah, I want a different kind of output. And you can see here what it's doing, something kind of relevant for maybe the airline industry. There's references to Zohar that I happen to know some of Zohar's research in, organizational journal of occupational safety and so forth. And anyway, it gives 10 items. And these things are the kinds of things that you might normally see, but we have a little references. Note that the references are not super current. A lot of it keeps updating, how current some of its stuff is. I used to have a trick, who won the last Super Bowl, and it used to be, it can only tell me about 2022 or 2020. Now it can tell me the most recent one. But anyway, you could see, we've got into the 2000s, but it's a start, right? And it's a nice collection of things. So these are the kinds of things you could do with ChatGPT. Another good thing that I always do is I ask it to critique itself. Give me some of the pros and cons. I could have actually said too, can you critique that list for me, or can you put it in a SWOT analysis table? And it understands that enough to go with it. But here it's interesting too. It's like focus on management or supervisory roles, within your organization. Where is the locus of safety climate start? And there's some on both. And again, the regenerate here kind of failed, but we'll let that slide for now. But you can start to get the idea of what's going on. And so anyway, critiquing, iteration, it's all part of the ways that I use it. This looks kind of cool, right? It's doing a lot of things. I would not say that this is going to take away your job. I think about this as helping your job in the way that, a great library also helps your job, right? This is just sort of access to a better library. This will never replace wisdom. And one of the things I do want to show you in a second, once this is done, is sort of a cautionary tale that I like to use. But anyway, you can see here it's going. And just to sort of pause for a second, like response to safety, assesses organizational responsiveness, but the term quick and effective could be subjective and vary greatly amongst employees. That's up to you to evaluate if this is the kind of thing you want to do. I will never swallow, detach my lower jaw and swallow exactly what it says. I'll always use my judgment. The cautionary tale I want to show you is from one of the first times I used Chat GPT. I asked it, can you design a leadership model based on the Smith and Wesson conflict resolution framework? I said, sure, based on the Smith and Wesson conflict resolution framework, which is a widely used approach. Now, I made that up. You may think about Smith and Wesson from, Old West days in the United States, but this is, an example of how it tried a little too hard to do pattern matching based on what I did. So it's like, hey, here's the model, like S, sustain respectful environment, M, I, T, H, and went through Smith and Wesson. There's the and where it even tried to attach something to that. And then after WES, it just sort of ran out of steam. And so then I called it on it. I said, okay, where is that model widely used? And it says, oh, I apologize for the confusion. It's a hypothetical model created by combining elements of conflict resolution and leadership principles. So it's not wrong on some level. It just tried too hard to pattern match. And these are decent things, but it was just trying to do something that it should not have tried. It will come up with academic references that do not exist. It will come up with facts that are not true, and it will, try to assert something that if you even call it on it in just the very next sentence, it'll say, "Oh, it never said, oop, that's wrong." It said, "I apologize for confusion." So it's pattern matching, and it gets this from the way that other people talk. So let me pause for a minute. I know I've been going through a few things, but I do want to highlight some tips as we go. So when you do something, start a new chat for a new topic. Don't overmix. Describe yourself and give it a role, which is kind of what I did about that sort of behavioral science and so forth and so on. And then spend time focusing prompts. We've done some of that, or refocus a request, ask for key references or particular kind of table output, right? Ask for it to critique a response, which we did. I'll show you in a minute pasting in some outside data and what that might look like. But this is like a virtual buddy that you can brainstorm with. Okay. Now, I'm going to skip to something else. Let's talk about not survey design or program design. You can ask it about methods or whatever you want to do. But let's talk about analysis for a second. Now, I know that what a lot of people want or sort of hope for is to be able to paste in all of their employee survey comments and get a great summary out. That kind of thing is technologically possible, but I'm not going to get into that because the privacy issues, prevents us from really doing any of that with client data. And it almost assuredly, for 99% of you on the phone, maybe 100, your own organizational policies and practices would prevent you from pasting in data. That is technically possible. There are ways to do it, but that's mechanically. There may be ways to do it, sort of contractually or policy-wise, but that's not today. So I'm going to skip over that. So what am I going to do? I'm going to start a new chat here, and I'm going to do something else. And I'm going to talk about pattern matching. So let's say I can't paste in data and I don't want to, but maybe I can paste in something else. And in this case, can you give me a metaphor to describe an employee opinion survey scores when employee engagement is high and stable over time, work effectiveness is mid-range and varies dramatically across divisions, and innovation is low? So let's see what happens here. All right, we get the garden metaphor. And engagement is the sturdy, well-established tree with good roots and things like that. And work effectiveness is a row of different types of flowers. I look at this, I kind of go, oh, well, thanks for the effort, but I'm not really all that interested in this particular one. But I was experimenting with this one before, and it did remind me of one of the origins of OrgVitality, our company, was in vitality and thinking about the vitality of a forest and things like that. And with innovation, there is a classic rhythm, that you can find under the academic heading of organizational ambidexterity that is all about, sort of turnover on products and, how do you keep innovating, and eventually the trees replace the meadow, and then the trees fall down and are replaced by something else. So maybe there's a little bit of innovation in there, but this is the kind of thing you could ask it. But let's say that I also want other kinds of analysis support. And here's one that I think is really handy. It's, all right, so you're a behavioral scientist, right? Inside the organization doing your survey work. Can you give me a macro in Excel to create a word cloud for top words and phrases used in organizational comments? Those of you who've done this may know that Chat GPT can write code. And so one of the things that it's talking through here is, sure, we got to prepare the data. We have some visual basic macro kinds of things and some word cloud generation. Those are the steps. Here's some of the visual basic code or the macro that it's doing, and it writes code in a separate box. You can see here the copy code button is up at the top. One of the things that it might tell me here, unless it's figured something new out since yesterday when I was testing this, is that after all of this just gets the data in a preparation state. And you might need to then paste the output of this into some other word cloud kind of service on the generator tool. So here it says, yeah, you can use this data in a word cloud generator tool. So that was kind of nice, but what about if I say now something like this? Excel is fine, but there's other tools out there. It's like, okay, can you just do the same thing, but in R? And it'll say, sure. And what it's about to do here is talk about some of the open source packages in R that help this happen. And you can actually get to a full-on word cloud in R. And so anyway, and this is lightning fast, right? Is this going to be exactly what you want? No. Will it tell you, hey, remember to replace these variables with those names and whatever your data is? Yeah, it's going to say some of that. But you're probably going to want to take what it's doing here and adjust it a little bit yourself. And if you are a little bit more old school and less into R, but into SPSS, it also knows SPSS. So here's, write me syntax to make a histogram of the overall leadership scores on a decision-making competency within a 360 assessment. And so it can help you do these kinds of things. So there's, even if you can't paste your own data in, or you're reluctant or uncertain and so forth, you can paste in some things kind of like this. And so there's a lot of ways that this tool can help you tomorrow, even if you haven't reached any kind of clearance to actually do things, to paste data inside of Chat GPT. Other kinds of things you could do that are kind of interesting. Let me start a new chat here. And so here is another one. Let me paste this in. This is a little bit more, it's risking a little bit of data. And so here, let's say that you're a communications expert and you want a newsletter. And so I'm not pasting in data per se, I'm pasting in a few nuggets, and this might be a little still dicey, but still okay to do. So let's say that here's the nuggets. Hey, employee engagement is high and very stable, particularly in Pride. It's clear that we have some work to do on inclusion. Men and women are similar, maybe overall, but with executive women and executive men start to stray. Employees think things are very efficient, but while they're encouraged to come up with new and better ways of doing things, actual innovation that sticks is lacking. And then there's a cross-functional nature of our strategy that needs to be addressed. So it can write a newsletter. Now, it's assuming, and I can tell it, no, don't do it quite that way, but it's assuming that this is more like an email newsletter where it's like a dear colleagues, and here's sort of our subject. And it's converting those 5 points I wrote into the context of an article story. And so you can do things like this with it. So, is this awesome and fantastic? Yeah, it might not have some of the nuance. It doesn't have a CEO quote or, the kind of things that you might want, but it's kind of nice that it gives you a starting point to think about things like this. And it, translated some of my, my statement was the kinds of cross-functional collaboration required for our strategy has declined and needs to be addressed. And it says, hey, the need for enhanced cross-functional collaboration. Feedback indicates a decline. Recognizing this, we're committed to revive. It sounds like someone from corporate communications might have written this. It's a little fluffy, maybe, not to knock our colleagues in corporate communications, but it's a little. It has some of that upbeat nature. Now you can tell it something different and have it write in a different style. Or you can have it be snarky or write in a different language. You can say, translate this into something else. But, while I'm on the topic of articles and critiquing, let me show you one thing that I did, which is I had pretend you're a consultant in a small firm based on helping large global organizations change on the principles of behavioral sciences, employee surveys, and HR metrics. So I said, basically, pretend you're someone like me. Below is an e-newsletter article about organizations that create policies and about return to office. And I said, here's my draft. And I pasted it in with a few bullet points. And I asked it to critique it. And it said, sure. Here's some critiques. Hey, it assumes that every organization's goal for returning to the office is collaboration, innovation, organizational culture, which I kind of referenced. And, it says, hey, you might want to actually put some citations behind some of the things you say. And it says one-sided viewpoint, stresses organizations that have already decided their return to office policies. Well, that was part of the point I was trying to dive into. So I did say a little bit later, hey, good advice, but let's assume that the return to office policies have already been set by the CEO and there's no changing that. And the policy, changing the basic tenet of the policy, but there is opportunity to adapt how the policy is implemented. Give that, what advice would you give? And it refined its advice and talked about, some things I might want to add, like hybrid work team collaboration and review and feedback loops and some other kinds of things. So did I, again, swallow this exactly? No, but it was kind of handy and it helped me figure some things out. Another sort of general article type of thing, I was looking to update a piece on response rate advice. And so, here's response rate advice. And so I could say, for example, back to our airline industry, it's like, sorry, let me bring that back. If I were to say here, can you tailor that advice to the airline industry? I don't know what it's going to do here. It is always agreeable. It's like, certainly. And, the exclamation points I could probably do without, but, hey, it's enthusiastic. And so it's trying to do that. Now, will this actually be great advice? I don't know. But it might help you think about things you might not have otherwise thought of. Now, I have some specific ideas on incentives for response rates and things like that. I don't really believe in them at an individual level, maybe a group level, but so this is the kind of thing you're going to have to use your own wisdom to figure out if it's a good list or not. Now, as we're kind of winding down here, there's one other general flavor I want to say, which is about action. And rather than have a new one, I want to show you one that was generated before. So again, you're a behavioral scientist working inside a large global organization, doing the survey, so forth. What advice would you give to an executive team to support stronger climate for innovation, where the employee survey shows that employees feel encouraged to come up with new and better ways of doing things, but the best ideas do not make it through to implementation? Note there's some differences in survey scores by division, but the goal here is to create some organization-wide action. So once you have a certain nugget you're working on, you can pop that in. You give it a context, you tell it kind of who you are and how to think, and it comes up again. And this is what it often does with its bullet-pointed list of things. And I was reading this earlier, and it's like I got intrigued by this idea of incubation and support structures. So is this hack days? Is this leaning into other kinds of things? So I actually asked, I was like, tell me more about the idea incubation and support structures. And they talk about ideas and mentorship and resource allocation and incubation programs. Could be kind of like hack days and so forth, collaborative workspaces, pilot tests, celebrations, and learning and iteration, which is kind of fine. I happen to know a lot about this topic. Our CEO, Jeff Saltzman, and I wrote a book called Creating the Vital Organization, about innovation and change. And so a lot of that was based on this organizational ambidexterity term. So I said, well, hey, what about this? Can you weave some of that in? And it started to, and it talked about dual structures and, other kinds of things. So point here is not to review exactly what I said here, but to start to think about what it can do to help you out. Let's see, I want to, please, if you've got any questions or comments, put them in the chat. I'm going to move here to a few tips on how to use this. That I've said these kinds of things, but don't let it go unsupervised. A lot of times there's no right answers. Like I said, it'll give you like a different answer on Tuesday than it did on Monday. But really think about it as pattern matching, or it's like writing an email. There's no single correct, accurate way to write an email. There's lots of different ways. And a lot of times the best answers that you get from this are those where sort of a generic or average of the internet would be okay. That's not exactly what it's doing here. But if you're looking for something super nuanced, you can keep pressing it and asking. It might take some iterations and you might get there, but a lot of that special nuance is going to come from you. It won't be the final answer. It is over enthusiastic and may say things that are not really true. And so be sure to double check your facts. You might not get the same response, 2 days in a row, as I mentioned. And then you ask it for a critique, but it's hard for it to show its work based on the nature of large language models that it's using. It's hard for it to know exactly where it's pulling stuff from. You can ask it for references, and then you can sort of double check things. But think about it as like, not exactly like gossip, but something that somebody told somebody who told somebody who told you and laid it out like this. You might have some independent verification that you're going to need to do on your own. Practice your queries and develop the skill. Definitely be concerned about privacy. Remember that it's chained to its data sources. If those are incomplete or meh, then your answers are going to be incomplete or meh or biased. And it never will replace clear thinking, asking better questions, or the wisdom that we can provide. So there's been some questions that I think I've kind of addressed and answered as we've gone through. There's been a little bit of back and forth in the chat, but promised a half-hour coffee chat, so hopefully this was a nice interlude in your day. We'll be sending out some follow-up information for you. If you have any questions for us about this, I will add that we're very excited at OrgVitality about how we're starting to use these kind of things, 100% focused on privacy, but there's our ways that to start to overcome that. Quality and monitoring that is always a big thing. We are working on some very exciting things with us here too. So thank you for your participation. You're about to see, when we end this, a survey. Please take that survey and again, have a good rest of your day. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.